looking at the guidelines for the different goals in terms of nutrition. So let's see what we've got. So if we're looking at weight loss at all, we're going to be looking at trying to create a sustainable calorie deficit, which can be applied on a kind of a long basis without actually negatively affecting day-to-day function. So for example, if we're thinking about sorry, just jumping around there. If we're thinking about a daily deficit of, say, around 200 kilocalories, over a week, that's going to be 1,400 calories, and that's going to result in a gradual weight loss, but it's also going to ensure that you're going to be having sufficient intake of all the micro and macro nutrients. So fat loss, obviously, again, you're going to be looking for a calorie deficit to be effective. And this is also going to be achieved by reducing carbohydrate, increasing your protein so that you're going to be able to increase muscle atrophy, and muscle, as we know, burns more fat, but also mixing it with some resistance training and some cardiovascular training. So the calorie deficit really does need to be a sustainable one, but we're going to be looking at, as I say, reducing carbs, because that's how you're going to really stimulate fat metabolism. So that's not no carbs, it just means just a small alteration in carbs from the previous levels. So hypertrophy, this is wanting to build muscle, and to be able to do that, you need to create a calorie surplus. It's really important they understand this isn't just a case of you can eat whatever food you want, but it's got to be a sustainable increase in both the carbohydrate and in the protein consumption in order to get that stimulation of muscle growth. Obviously, this needs to be done in association with an effective resistance training program, because without this, the calorie surplus is obviously just going to be fat. So calorie surplus, increased protein, maintaining carbs, and ensuring you're maintaining the physical side of it as well. Okay, so in terms of actually how much muscle is going to be created, that's going to be determined by a number of factors, some of which are in your control and some of which aren't. You're looking at someone's genetics, someone's somatotype, what's their inherent natural body shape and body type, their hormone levels, none of which you can really change much, but the training and the nutrition and the recovery times, obviously you can. So just being aware of all the different factors that feed into achieving muscle gain. So let's have a look in a bit more detail. So you're going to look at an increased volume of training. Basically, to be able to get that muscle gain, you've got to ratchet up the amount of training, but that's going to require an increased energy intake. So you're looking at around 500 calories a day is going to allow for that increased needs for the training and for the muscle growth. So anything more than that, or if you're putting more energy in than is needed, you're just going to get weight gain in the form of fat, which is unlikely to be a required result. So you need to provide enough carbs just purely for the energy for training. And in terms of protein, you're looking at the higher end of the scale, 1.4 to 1.8 grams per kilogram of body weight per day, 1.4 to 1.8, and that's for muscle gain. So roughly, a client might ask, how much muscle gain is it reasonable to expect? And it tends to be up to about a kilogram a month if you're sustaining an effective strength training program, half to 1 kilogram a month. So sports performance in terms of nutrition for sports performance is going to vary wildly depending on the specific form sport you're talking about. For example, if you're looking at endurance training, an increase in the simple and complex carbs will support that sort of energy requirement, and increasing protein is going to aid recovery. But you also may want less weight to carry around, and so you need to have that trade-off between providing enough energy alongside potentially a weight loss strategy. So you need to really understand the requirements of the particular sport and the different energy pathways which are going to be used in before you can really give any, appropriate guidance and advice. So things you might be looking at, carbs restriction, you might be looking at carb loading, you might be looking at high protein diets, you might be looking at a calorie surplus or a deficit. It's going to very much depend on the person, their goals and their sport. So we said for muscle gain, you're looking at 1.4 to 1.8 grams per kilogram of muscle. For endurance exercise, the protein should be 1.2 to 1.4. So on the lower than that, higher than your average person, but it's lower than the muscle gain. So you're looking at that level of protein intake. You need to have the correct sort of level of carbs and fats because those are going to be your fuels for endurance training, and you need to make sure those are going to be available for the body. But you really need to look at ensuring that there's adequate intake before, during, and after event. So let's have a look at those stages in a bit more detail. So before exercising, you want to consume a light meal 2 hours before training or a large meal 4 hours before training. And you want some high GI carbs, the ones that are going to hit the bloodstream quickly, about 15 minutes before the start of a session. Where you've got longer duration events, you can use this carb loading method, which ensures that you've got maximum amounts of glycogen stores in your body prior to the start to try and mitigate for the effects of glycogen depletion and fatigue. So how do you do carbs loading? Well, this is the way you do it. So in the week running up to the event, the amount of training the individual's doing needs to drop off a bit. But during that week, they need to have a high carb diet, and they need to be looking at consuming between 7 to 12 grams per kilogram of carbs per body weight of their body weight. So that they're reducing their training, they're increasing their carbs, and that's going to create that maximal glycogen store for the event itself. So we've looked at before exercise. Now, during exercise, if you've got something that's going to be lasting for more than 90 minutes, then it's going to really, really help if you can then look at ensuring, a small amount of carbs, 25 to 30 grams, is taken every sort of 15 to 30 minutes. And that needs to really begin from the 90 minutes onwards, because that's when your glycogen stores are going to be really looking at depleting. You want to have those high GI carb foods that don't take long to digest, that are going to be straight in to the bloodstream, giving that immediate burst of energy. So you just need to be aware of, if you're looking after a sports person, of what the signs and symptoms of glycogen depletion and fatigue are. So they can really be aware of when they need to start taking in some carbs during the event. So after exercise, you want to be replacing those glycogen stores really as soon as possible. So you're going to want to be looking at consuming 1 gram per kilogram of body weights of some sort of high GI carbs. So either that can be in the form of a liquid drink, or it can be as a snack, and things like dried fruit, or rice cakes are good examples of food to have post-event, post-exercise. So the reason why you want a high GI is so that your carbs are going to hit your empty stomach, and they're going to get to the liver cells and get those glycogen stores are going to be restored as soon as possible. You can then have a larger meal, within the next 2 hours. But after exercise, it takes between 17 to 20 hours to re-establish those full glycogen stores once those glycogen levels have been really depleted. So there needs to be some recovery time in order to resupply the body with glycogen. So I think we've looked at this. This is just the same, just looking at the amount of carbohydrates that need to be taken. So here are some specific guidelines looking at the grams of carbs needed per body weight. So you can use this chart to help you work out how much carbohydrate intake your client might need depending on their body weight. Your body is nearly 2/3 water, so it's really, really important that enough fluid is consumed to stay hydrated and healthy during exercise. And how much you need is going to depend on things like the weather, how hot it is, actually the endurance of the exercise, how much physical activity you're doing, and also your age. But as a minimum, the Eat Well guide, if you remember, recommends 6 to 8 glasses of fluid a day. So let me just see if we've got before exercise, you want to drink about 500 mils of water in the 2 hours leading up to your session to make sure that you're well hydrated and you're going to be able to urinate properly and well. And then during, you want to be taking a few sips every 15 minutes, which equates to about 120 to 180 mils every 15 minutes, just to keep those hydration levels up. And then after the exercise, you want to replace the fluid you've lost plus half again. And it says this accounts for the thermal effect of exercise. That's just the heat that's causing extra fluid loss during the exercise. So really important to keep well hydrated, and there's the guidelines of how to do it. Now, people often ask about sports drinks. So you've got a variety of types. You've got hypotonic, isotonic, and hypertonic. So hypotonic means it's got a lower amount of glucose than your bloodstream. Isotonic means it's the same, and hypertonic means it's got more glucose, than your body has. So the hypotonic and isotonic kinds of drinks may provide some enhanced hydration compared to plain water. And the hypertonic drinks can be useful in terms of, just because they've got glucose in them, replenishing those glycogen stores during exercise and immediately after exercise. And so that's the end of that section, looking at some guidelines for different goals.